Welcome back, and the special transmission continues. Pakistan has taken a position on Afghanistan's issue. Prime Minister today, while addressing the conference, said world should not repeat the mistakes of disengaging Afghanistan. When Pakistan today is welcoming 57 foreign ministers, including many other organizations that have come to Pakistan, this opens up an immense opportunity for Pakistan as well. It also speaks for the immense efforts made by Pakistan's foreign ministry to bring Pakistan's point of view forward and remind the global community that Pakistan is aware of its diplomatic responsibilities when it comes to Afghanistan. I am joined by Mr. Rauf Hassan. He is a Special Assistant to Prime Minister on Information and Broadcasting. He's also CEO of Regional Peace Institute and has remained engaged in various diplomatic dialogues. Rauf Hassan sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you, very kind of you.
And in the first part of my program, we were talking to an American expert. His name is Dr. Carl, and he is a director in the University of Akron. He was telling us about the United States position, and one very pertinent point that he made was that since Taliban leadership has some internationally declared criminals or terrorists in their power corridor, in their cabinet memberships, they cannot engage with Taliban. It is against their laws, and therefore the banking channels cannot be operationalized. Your quick comments on it, sir.
Let me go back to February of 2020. That was 28th of February. The same Americans sat across the table with the Taliban, the same Taliban, in Doha, and signed a deal.
A deal.
And what did that deal stipulate? Number one, that the Afghan Taliban would not allow the use of Afghan soil for any terrorist activity. And number two, the Americans gave a timeline for the withdrawal of their troops, right? Now, were these Taliban who are ruling Afghanistan today any different from those Taliban that the Americans legitimized back in February? Are they any different from those people, with whom they sat across and said, well, all right, we will withdraw our troops? The Taliban were not a non-entity. They're not a non-entity then. They were not a non-entity then. They're not a non-entity today. It is the Americans who legitimized them and paved the way for the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban.
Legitimize them by bypassing the then sitting,
by signing a deal with them,
by bypassing the then sitting
and
government,
then bypassing the sitting government, the so-called elected, democratically elected government of Afghanistan, which by no stretch of imagination was a democratically elected government. So the same Americans today stand up and say, simply because they do not want to cooperate with the Taliban, they're out on a revenge course, and this revenge they are not just seeking from the Afghan people, they are also seeking from my country, Pakistan. And there are reasons for that. We can go into that debate, because unfortunately American position or American narrative in this part of the world runs counter to Pakistan's narrative, and consequently the narratives of so many other countries of the region, be it Russia, be it China, be it the Central Asian republics. Consequently, it is a revenge course that the Americans are treading at this moment in time. So they're saying, that since we have this law in our country, and so we cannot deal with the Taliban, that is so self-absorbing, basically, that it's ridiculous. It's their law. It is not the law of the world.
Not only that, but the deal also, during that, in that deal, this was also a point that Taliban will not attack on the American troops.
And they did not.
And they did not.
And they did not.
And they did not.
Between February and August, February of 20th and August of 21, there were about 18 months, 1.5 years. During this entire period, there was no attack on the American troops. I mean, they should cite me one example where the Taliban have violated their part of the deal.
300,000 military on ground was reduced to last few men.
Yeah.
I mean, the last count was 10,000 soldiers were all evacuated, no attacks by Taliban. They were a legitimate body back then, but now when Americans, and please remind me, when Americans also promised the financial support for Afghanistan if they're given a safe passage out in the first phase of the talks?
Well, they did, but let me just come back to this point again. I mean, who are these people that they're trying to point out, who are so-called terrorists according to them? They're the Haqqani network. And Haqqani network, They are the people who are rumored to be closer to Pakistan than the rest of the Taliban, although, you know, we have excellent working relation with the entire community. So basically, it's divide and rule. I mean, they want the Afghan Taliban to throw out the Haqqani network, you know, the so-called pro-Pakistan camp, you know, from within their organization, and then they say, all right, we'll deal with you. So what does it point out? Technically, they're on a revenge course, as I said, basically, and I think it is not just that they're seeking revenge from Afghanistan, they are also seeking revenge from Pakistan. And I think the Prime Minister's speech today, you know, was absolutely dot on. Dot on. He reminded the world, you know, that look, it's time for us to, for the entire Muslim community to support Afghanistan, because we can't let it go down the way it is going. Because if Afghanistan collapses, it's going to be, you know, extremely dangerous for all countries of the region, particularly those that neighbor Afghanistan, most notably Pakistan. So we can't take that chance today. And I'm happy that finally the OIC has taken this initiative. You know, and they've met in Islamabad, which is the most relevant capital in the world today with regard to the situation in Afghanistan. So I think it's a good positive step, and I think the OIC has a role to play in the sense, you know, that they should stand up to the Western world, and this is the message again that the Prime Minister gave. It is time to sound a message for the Western world that, look, they are not the commanders of the entire world. They have to be sensitive, you know, to the well-being of all regions of the world, and this part of the world absolutely is one of the most sensitive areas. Has been a sensitive area for the last 40 to 50 years, you know, since Afghanistan has been burning. I mean, the world should have pity on Afghanistan. For God's sake, these people have suffered for 41 years of perpetual war.
90%.
They are desperate for peace, and the world must ensure that they have peace. And what is the role of the Americans at this juncture? You know, they are still trying to truncate Afghanistan further.
But, and let me also bring it out again that 90% of the people are today making less than $2 a day. Afghanistan is facing one of the worst famines of its history, and there are no banking channel operational in the country.
So, who has done it? Who is holding on to Afghan assets? $9.5 billion. Americans. Who has frozen the banking channels? Americans. Not the European community, not the United Nations, not the international donor organizations. But Americans, basically. I mean, it's an inhuman conduct on the part of. I'm sorry, I'm constrained to say this. You know, I don't know who's going to be happy and who's not going. It is absolutely downright inhuman conduct on the part of Americans. They want to see. Let me tell you. Let me just quote you, and I've got to share. Let me quote you a couple of things. It's very important, and it is not me. It is what the United Nations is saying. You know, recently, Telegraph conducted a poll, a study, and in an open letter, you know, that the agencies, international agencies, you know, have sent to United Nations, they've said that sanctions would kill more Afghans than the war has done. This is not me, this is not you. This is the international organizations, agencies who have sent a letter to the United Nations. Then the same thing, the same Telegraph, which conducted this poll, they said, talking to people, they were unanimous about saying this: poverty was here before. The government installed by the US stole all the money, and now the same foreigners have frozen the funds. Just look at the way. Isolating the country, new rulers would lead to more extremism, humanitarian collapse, and an exodus of refugees. This is the international agencies, and I've been in touch with so many of them, basically.
But Rosab, this actually points out to a more pertinent question, and this is perhaps a very right time to ask this question as well. Is United States today alone in this entirely undefendable point of view that it has toward Afghanistan, when 57 countries are standing shoulders to shoulder saying this is inhuman, this is not on, you cannot do this? Do you think its allies like European Union are fully on board when it comes to the stance on Afghanistan?
Well, I have it from well-informed sources, you know, that the European community has been urging the Americans to take a more pragmatic view. And this is not a pragmatic view. This is an inhuman view, as I call it, basically. You can't define it in any other way. But again, unfortunately, the European community, though they are flapping their wings, you know, to be free of the American shadows, you know, they still are, you know, under considerable influence from the Americans. So they do not hold this view. They are diametrically, they are in fact considerably different from this, but they've just not they're not being able to walk out of the American shadow. And I think in due course of time they will. And I think in the speeches today also, I was there for about 3-4 hours. I think a large number of countries were referring to the European community, and they were urging them to play a role in the current context. And I'm particularly chastened by the speech that was made by the United Nations representative of the United Nations Secretary General. He was absolutely forthright, and he said it's time to help Afghanistan. It is time to stop politicking. It's time to help Afghanistan. They're collapsing, and we can't afford to see Afghanistan collapsing. So this is coming from the United Nations, it's coming from the international donor organizations, this is coming more or less from the European community. So who's singled out? Who stand? I mean, the Muslim countries are meeting today. They are virtually unanimous. All the speeches that they made this morning when I was there, they were all for helping out Afghanistan, going out of the way. The Saudis have committed 1 billion riyals. The Chinese have committed a small amount. Pakistanis are sending aid, humanitarian aid. All the other Muslim countries are sending humanitarian aid. And I think by the end of the conference today, later this evening, I think there will be a joint communique, a joint statement at least, where I think other countries would also be making their commitment. So I also understand that at about 4:30, 5 o'clock, they had come to this agreement to constitute a mechanism under the OIC, under the OIC umbrella, which will be handling the flow of aid and assistance to Afghanistan. So I'm very optimistic that we're moving in that direction. I think it is important to single America out as the most inhuman country that I've witnessed in a long time.
Very rightly pointed out, Rauf Sahab, but most of these countries that are here today, financially, their position might not be as strong. Few have oil as their major income. We all know what has been happening to the oil industry for last, say, about 6-7 years. Other countries are still struggling with their own economic crisis. How effective this platform will be, even if what you expect is achieved outrightly?
I think the OIC platform, if they really want to make it effective, can be extremely effective, because I think in spite of the issues that you have raised, and very valid issues, I think Saudis still sit on a lot of money. The Gulf countries sit on a lot of money. And I think some other countries in the world also, which is from the Muslim bloc, they can spare some money, definitely. They can spare some money. But in addition to money and humanitarian assistance, what the Afghans need is support. They must understand that the world stands with them, or a large number of countries stand with them. That's absolutely vital at this point in time. I have been interacting with them because of my own tracks with Afghanistan, and I feel that, it's remarkable that, you see, last time when the Soviets sort of walked into Afghanistan, there was a huge exodus of refugees. They went into Iran, the bulk of them came into Pakistan. There were close to about 10 million people, which left Afghanistan. This time, people have not left Afghanistan.
And why not?
And this is, I'll come to that actually. In fact, they are staying on in Afghanistan because they feel that running away from Afghanistan, this is in spite of this economic migration thing, that the Americans are hanging in front of them. That look, if you leave Afghanistan, we will give you jobs, we'll give you this, and we'll give you that. In spite of that, other than that first surge of people, when the Americans were actually leaving Afghanistan, that they held on. Others are staying on in Afghanistan, and this springs out of an urge for peace to return to Afghanistan. After all, Afghanistan is their country, and they're a very proud people, bunch of very proud people. They don't want to leave Afghanistan any longer, so we don't see any influx of refugees into Pakistan. And similarly, there is no huge influx of refugees into Iran or other Central Asian countries, which border Afghanistan. So I feel there's a change this time. It is very distinctly different as compared to the last time the people left Afghanistan. So they want peace to return to Afghanistan. They want their life to be comfortable in Afghanistan. They don't want to leave for Europe and all that. I mean, for example, this track that I held, we had this Women for Peace initiative. So women came from Afghanistan, and we had women from Pakistan. They are all more or less anti-Taliban women.
Okay.
But they are staying in Afghanistan.
So what are you telling me is very different. I mean, you just said that there are anti-Taliban people still living in Afghanistan, comfortable enough, not leaving the country, despite all the economic crisis that they have.
Because this Taliban is far, far different, from the Taliban that we know from the end of last century until 2001. There have been no extraordinary reports of any torture or any extrajudicial killing or, you know, that kind of thing. People are living. These women are not anti-Afghanistan. They have differences with Taliban. So I should not say they are anti-Taliban. No, they have differences.
They have political differences.
They have political differences. They feel that they need more rights and all that. And the Taliban have committed to bringing peace. And that brings me to another point, you know, that I think we should debate and discuss. A few things are being set up as preconditions, you know, that unless the Taliban comply with these preconditions, you know, we will not extend recognition and all that. Now, each country, like the Prime Minister explained this morning when he was talking this afternoon, has its own cultural traditions.
But Joseph, for the sake of convenience of my viewers, would you would you like to again share these preconditions that have been, because no one is talking about these preconditions. Everyone is saying that America is not happy, the talks in Doha in the second phase have failed, and Taliban cannot be rescued right away.
Well, the preconditions as the Americans see it are, number one, an inclusive government. An inclusive government means that in a government which will have all the stakeholders in the world. Number two, all the stakeholders in Afghanistan. Number two, that it should recognize human rights. Number three, it should recognize the right of women to be educated. Number four, it should recognize the right of women to do jobs, to be employed, something. This and that. Number five, it should ensure that the Afghan soil is not used for launching any terrorist operations. Now, terrorist operations, of course, they're fighting. They're already fighting ISIS. They're already, you know, engaged in sort of, fighting other terrorist bodies there. It is not going to happen in a day. In fact, it is important for America to support the Taliban to be able to overcome these terrorist, you know, entities which are still existent in Afghanistan. Two, in Afghanistan today, the primary schools are open. In Afghanistan today, the universities are open. In Afghanistan today, out of 34 provinces, secondary school education is on in about 13 states. So 21 states are left, you know, basically, and it's ongoing. It's an ongoing process. It will happen. Okay? Women, these women came from Afghanistan, 10 of them, from Kabul, and they were not escorted by anybody. You know, things that used to be that, you know, they can only travel with a mahram. They can step out of their homes with a mahram. Well, there's no such thing at all. All these women came alone. They went back alone. They went back to Kabul. So, you know, all those preconditions that they're talking about. Now, my contention has always been that if you engage, if the Taliban are inclined to fulfilling all these conditions, and my clear impression is that they are, not only that they are inclined to fulfilling these preconditions, they are also working on fulfilling these preconditions. So it is through engagement with them that you can expedite the process, you know, rather than censuring them that, you know, you're not doing it, we're not going to help them, and pushing them into an economic collapse, pushing them towards a humanitarian tragedy, pushing them towards liquidation. This is not the right approach. This is not the right approach. I mean, I can talk about Israel. What are they doing? I can talk about the denial of rights to Palestine by America. I can talk about the insensitivity of Americans to the plight of the Kashmiri people. I can talk about the insincerity of Americans, you know, to so many other wars that they have fought. Look at the devastation they have caused to the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Libya. So, you know, we forget about these things. And right now, you know, this country, which is barely coming out of 41 years of continued fratricide and war, you are ensuring that they go back to it?
And Rauf Sahab, I understand this is not all happening just because Taliban, as you very rightly pointed out, are not agreeing to some terms and conditions. In fact, you just mentioned that even the terms and conditions are designed to create factions within Taliban. But what if Afghan government doesn't remain financially viable? What if this banking cycle doesn't work and it becomes difficult for Taliban to maintain the government? What will happen then? Will Afghanistan be split in further states, or will the chaos once again take over? Will it again become hub of militancy? Will have internal disorder? And if so, can the United States not forecast it at the moment?
Well, this question has two answers. Now, you are raising a proposition basically that if that happens, you know, I understand this through information that I have from sources, you know, that the government there is not collapsing. It will not collapse. Yes, but if it collapses, hypothetically, let's take up that issue. There's going to be a civil war-like conditions in Afghanistan. There's going to be further war. And I think that is what the Americans want. Why do they want? Basically, you have to try to fit this into the larger umbrella. And what is the larger umbrella here? It is contain China. And the pressure on Pakistan is to fulfill that principal objective in this part of the world by the Americans. They want to contain China because they're on a losing end now. I call this the new power corridor. In a couple of my articles, I've named it as the new power corridor. It starts in China. It goes to Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and go to Russia, and then on to the warm waters, and onto Europe. So this is the new power corridor emerging in the world. And it is Americans basically, they want to stall the emergence of this new power corridor. And that cannot happen. They cannot do it. Because I think there's enormous impetus which is going into this. The pressure on Pakistan is contain your relations with China, contain CPEC, and theoretically speaking, join us in our war against China. Pakistan cannot do that, and Pakistan will not do that. So, you have to read this under the larger umbrella also, basically. It is not just Afghanistan. Afghanistan fits into a larger game plan, basically. Americans are gradually trying to push this region towards a Cold War period. And Cold War period does not suit Pakistan. It does not suit the region because basically we want connectivity. And how are we going to get connectivity? We're going to connectivity by the expansion and spread of CPEC. This is the link, So we can't do it. So, there's so much more into it, basically, than just Afghanistan.
But Rauf Saab, if I agree with what you just said, hypothetically speaking, this means that this is all happening because they want more unrest around China as much as possible. And if that is the case, China obviously understands this. China is smart enough to understand this. But we do not see China taking a lead position in this entire process. If I go an extra mile and say not enough money has been pumped in by China despite realizing the fact that Afghanistan today is in a severe financial crisis, how would you respond to it?
China, if you study China, if you have dealt with China, if you have gone through the Chinese history, you will remember that they are possibly one of the most pragmatic nations in the world. They think before they act, but once they act, they are sure-footed. The Chinese will come. Chinese will come to the rescue of Afghanistan. They're already there. All the indications are that they are. It's just that there's a couple of things basically that they're looking into, and that these couple of things pertain to terrorism. They have been attacked, they have been destabilized, from Afghanistan. That is when the previous governments were in power, and they want to ensure that there is no such risk in the future. This is ISIS-K basically, ISIS Khorasan, which was working against the Chinese, and they're still working against the Chinese, and this is what the Taliban are fighting. So maybe there is some weight, but China will definitely come. But they come.
While the state of Afghanistan doesn't have cash, ISIK reportedly is distributing cash in the communities. They are cash rich, just like ISIS was cash rich back
Where is
in
that money coming from?
Yeah. That's a question.
No, you tell me.
I'll not tell you.
I'm
this conversation.
To you.
No, I'll
Where's the
respond
money
to it.
coming from? Who's supplying that money?
I really don't know, but in case of Syria, we know there were some drop boxes being opened, filled with weapon and dollars. But let's move to next point. SMQ, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, gave 6-point agenda from Pakistan side. It's Pakistan's solution, proposed solution to the problem. The first point was to create a vehicle within OIC to deliver.
This has been created already.
And this has been created already, as you said. The second was technical and vocational skill for Afghanis.
We are providing that. We want other countries to do that also. That's very important. So we are providing skills in education, we are providing skills in health, we are providing skills in small and medium businesses to them also.
But we are also looking at the support of other countries.
We want them to, we're urging them to do the same, basically. Because we have to literally, Shavasa, we have to rebuild Afghanistan. Americans have been called multiple times over. Look at what they did to Kabul airport. They even broke the computers while they were leaving. They broke the windows. They broke the doors. They did not leave anything intact at Kabul airport. This is what they've done. This is the level of vengeance that they're trying to wreak in Afghanistan.
Sir, you are not appreciative of the fact that Amrullah Saleh left $6.5 million in cash in his house.
And what about President Ghani?
I mean, I don't know how much
What about Hangullah? What about others?
Where did that money go?
Read it's called the Afghanistan Papers. It has now been compiled into a book form. It's called. I have quoted it in a number of my articles. It is called At War with the Truth, and this came out of America, not from Pakistan, not from China, not from Russia. And this is about 2,000 pages, and this goes over the history of Afghanistan, how the Americans mishandled it. Because peace in Afghanistan was never an American motive. This is my contention. They occupied Afghanistan. And the occupation was not meant to bring peace to Afghanistan. It was meant to bring further fratricide to Afghanistan so that the region would remain unstable, so that China could be contained, so that countries like Pakistan could be contained. You know, do you imagine the kind of destabilization which was occurring across our western border into Balochistan and into the KP? You see the enormous change which has occurred in the last 3 to 4 months' time since Taliban have taken over. Our borders are restful now. Who was doing it? Of course, India factor is there. We are not getting into India factor at this moment in time. The money factor, which is a very important factor, where's the money coming from?
Yeah.
The Americans are giving money, and it is coming through India.
One of the Indian consulates on the border of Pakistan was found filled with 3 billion rupees of cash that Taliban made a video of and shared on the media. We'll come to that later, but since you're also a member of the federal cabinet, there is a very pertinent question that I have for you. I don't believe anyone else would have been in the right position to respond to it. And that despite all the crisis that you very pertinently and significantly highlighted, we are still deciding to let the Afghan refugees go back. 300,000 of them are in Pakistan, and today it was decided that their visas will not be extended. We understand that Afghanistan's financial condition is very bad. This is perhaps the reason all of us are here today. How do you see this happening, this development? What are your comments on it?
See, the point is, I think we already have over 3 million refugees stationed in Pakistan. They're both legal as well as illegal. You know, they have their cards and they don't have their cards.
1.4 million are registered.
Registered, and others are unregistered. We have close to 3 million people living in Pakistan. Pakistan cannot afford any more refugees. That's a fact, because you know our own economic condition and all that. So we are interacting with the government there. We are in touch with them and we're working with them. So all the decisions which are being taken by the government of Pakistan are through engagement with the government in Afghanistan. Consequently, I think there must be reason, you know, for them to go back. I don't think there is 300,000 people, you know. I think there's much less than that, because a lot of people who came to Pakistan have gone on to the Western world, you know, because they've been taken from here. But there are some, that's right, you know. So we feel that, you know, we're not in a position to accommodate any more refugees. So they will have to go back. How they go back, you know, after all, we have been saying the same thing about those 3 million refugees, you know, who've been stationed in Pakistan for 40 years, and they haven't gone back because they don't want to go back. They've bought properties here, they've gotten married here, they have children here, they have grandchildren here, their families here. So many other factors, but these are new refugees. We do not want them to become like the old refugees. So it's important to know that they go back. We'll continue to work with the Afghan government and all that.
There is one more important element in this entire conversation that we have perhaps missed so far. And also this is Russia. Russia considers Central Asian Republic as its soft belly and is extremely critical of the fact that if anything goes worse in Afghanistan, perhaps it will affect the entire Central Asian Republic. How do you think Russia is going to respond to the existing economic challenges of Afghanistan?
There is consensus within the regional countries, and that includes Russia and the Central Asian republics, you know, that peace must return to this part of the world. There is absolutely no ambiguity about that. Now, each country has its own concerns regarding Afghanistan, the situation in Afghanistan, not regarding Afghanistan. China has, like I said, you know, it has its concerns. You know, similarly, but you must also, before I move into that, you must remember it is for the first time in practically the entire history of Afghanistan that the government in Kabul has control over entire Afghanistan. No government before that.
Maybe after 70s? Maybe after 70s is the first time.
Yeah, this is even the Taliban government back in the
90s didn't have control of entire
control over Panjshir and a couple of other provinces, right? So this is number one. So the de facto aspect is absolutely complete. They have total control over the entire Afghanistan. The sensitivities are there basically, but even countries, you know, which are like, for example, the Panjshir Valley, you know, which is the Tajiks, they're also interacting with Afghanistan, and I think the Prime Minister is working very closely with the Tajik president, and I think we are gradually moving towards a settlement all concerns, that these countries may have. Overall, there is a consensus, that peace must return to Afghanistan, and that, when I say that, it means it includes Russia, it includes the Central Asian republics, it includes Iran, Pakistan, China, all those countries which either border Afghanistan or in the proximity of Afghanistan, basically. So with this consensus, basically, and I think something else may emerge today from the meeting. I was wondering, and I put it in my article that came out on Friday, that the de facto status has been accorded to Afghanistan. I think this must change to de jure.
No, so you have to explain this further. What is the de facto status that has been given?
The de facto status is that we have not shut down our embassies there. So many other countries have not shut down their embassies there. So they continue to, unlike the previous time when the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, there were only 3 embassies there, and only 1 embassy was functional. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and UAE had recognized Afghan government, but only Pakistani embassy was functioning. So we were also looking after the interests of Saudi Arabia and UAE. Now their embassies are also functional, and so many other embassies like Chinese embassy, Russian embassy, Central Asian republics embassies, Iranian embassy, Turkish embassy, Pakistan's embassy, of course, they're functional there. I mean, the Gulf countries' embassies, they're functional there. So that was, so when you're interacting with the government there, this is like according de facto recognition that you accept that there is a government in Afghanistan which we are dealing with. De jure means, which we technically refer to as recognition, as a formal recognition, which has not yet been extended, But I think it is going to be debated, and it was brought up by the foreign minister also, that, we should look at the possibility of according a collective recognition, formal recognition to Afghanistan. And I think, this is my personal opinion, this is not the government's opinion, and let me share it with you. I feel that, yes, if they want to continue working with Afghanistan, then it will have to be a de jure recognition. They will have to formally recognize the government of Afghanistan as the legitimate government of the country.
But Rauf Sahab, taking advantage of your presence, I would like to understand the pros and cons of recognizing Taliban's government while United States. I mean, we just hypothetically trying to understand a worst case or a best case scenario. What will happen if 30 out of these 57 countries, this is just for the sake of understanding, decide that yes, despite the fact that United States has not recognized it, we are going to recognize. What will happen then? What can be a diplomatic cost of it?
The counter question is, what can happen? Will the Americans impose sanctions on all these 57 countries? No, they can't. They can't. This move, I think, will be a winning move.
Okay.
This will put America on the back foot. If we today, communicate a unity within the Muslim world to the Americans that, look, we are concerned about a brotherly country,
okay,
and we are going to extend recognition to them, and we recognize them. We want to work with them because we want peace to return to Afghanistan. I think it will be a very definitive message to the Americans that, look, stop doing this. We are not going to buy this any longer. I think this is the message that we must send to the Americans.
Is this why Imran Khan today said that this is time to act as, he reminded about the collective responsibility as Ummah?
Yes, I think so. I think if you listen to his speech, there were a couple of other very significant things that he stated. First of all, as you said, he was talking about a collective, unified approach. I think that's absolutely vital. The fact that 57 countries have come to Islamabad, and they're sitting here today, and they're talking, sitting under the same roof, I think it's a remarkable achievement. It's a breakthrough achievement for Pakistan. I think kudos to them. Number one. Number two, they're all positive. All these speeches which have been made on the floor of the National Assembly, which is where the meeting is being held, they were all positive. All positive. The Turkish speech, the Saudi speech, and so many other people which represented various groups within the OIC. They came up. Particularly, most importantly, as I said before, the UN speech. The representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations. He was the most pragmatic and the most forthcoming. He said it's time to help Afghanistan, and the Secretary General wanted to come here. We wished that he had, but unfortunately, he has not come here. So I think we're on the right course, and I think what the OIC must. Unfortunately, I think I must make a comment on that. Unfortunately, OIC has not been able to deliver much in the past. The history, if you go at OIC's history, unfortunately, it has not been able to deliver much, on the sufferance, that the Muslim countries, have gone through and continue to go through. So I think it's time, that at least in concerning Afghanistan, it is able to come up with a unified approach, and I think not just a unified approach, but a proactive approach. Let's take the ball back to the American court and say, look, this is not going to happen. We are not going to let this happen.
Rauf, You very nicely pointed out that all these countries have come to Islamabad. They are today participating in a session that is hosted and organized by Islamabad. What would be happening in Delhi at the moment? Delhi couldn't even afford or tolerate an international team like New Zealand coming and playing 2-3 games here. We know that they were involved in the attack on Sri Lankan team, which actually practically halted the international cricket in Pakistan. But now this such marvelous diplomatic activities happening, so many countries are coming. It must be a hard day at Delhi. What do you think?
I think they are in mourning. But let's not forget the fact, that they've collected, I think, 4 foreign ministers of Central Asian republics. They're holding a mini summit there. I don't know what purpose will that serve, but I think it is just to show the world, that we can also collect 4 people. And it's a 4-country summit, which they are. And India is a big country. Obviously, they exercise some influence and all that. But Afghanistan has been a great tactical victory. And I would hope and pray for Pakistan, but I would hope and pray that it is turned into a strategic victory. We have been able to secure, to a great extent, our western borders. What we have to now try to do basically is that, this thing that we have secured, it becomes a permanent feature, and nobody destabilizes Pakistan from across our western border, which runs into Afghanistan. And this is what the Indians have been doing, particularly in the last 20 years, ever since the Americans. Again, the American role exercised through so-called democracy in Afghanistan, American role exercised through the likes of Karzai, American role exercised through the likes of Ghani. What were they doing for 21 years when the Americans were there, feeding them, virtually feeding them? 60% of the Afghan GDP came as aid from America. And today they say, why are they not meeting the expenses? In the past 21 years, 60% of the entire Afghan GDP was being contributed by America. They're not even contributing 1 penny now. And still, Afghanistan is surviving. And thanks to some countries which are supporting Afghanistan, I don't want to name them, I know the countries, they're supporting Afghanistan. And they will continue to support Afghanistan. I think more countries will support Afghanistan. So for India, it's a great setback. And I think for them to get back into the game, the Afghan game so-called, I think it's going to be almost impossible. Obviously, they are flapping their wings, they will be trying desperately, to get back into the game. But I think Pakistan has played a great innings here.
And it reminds me that India also hosted an event, a diplomatic event, where Pakistan was also invited, and Pakistan boycotted the event.
No, Pakistan did not go. Pakistan did not attend the Democracy Summit, and Pakistan has criticized the American attempts to politicize the Beijing Winter Games. So all these are unheard of in the past. I mean, we must try to, if you may allow me, basically, you must try to understand the principal change of approach that Pakistan has exhibited in the last 3 years, which is a proactive approach. Basically, it's an approach based in principles and values, and the Prime Minister never tires of talking about those principles and those values. Even today, he talked about those. He brought up the Palestine issue. He brought up the Kashmir issue. He brought up the Islamophobia issue. And these are the issues which he has brought out at all the international fora. Wherever he goes, he talks about it, and not with an intention to wreak vengeance or something. No, with an intention to convince the world that, look, these are issues which need to be paid attention to. So I think this is an approach that I have never seen. I mean, I'm virtually at the fag end of my life. I feel that I have never seen such proactive approach, such positive approach, and such healthy approach to bringing focus back on the issues which are of concern to Pakistan. So that's a very major change which has occurred.
Some countries today in the conference do not enjoy a very good diplomatic relationship with each other. We saw all of these countries together. We saw them giving statements that were favorable. Isn't it in itself a great diplomatic achievement of Pakistan that none of these countries refused to participate in the event because of the participation of another?
It happened once before, 1974, when the first Islamic summit was held in Lahore. Then Bhutto Saab was the Prime Minister, and we saw Gaddafi and King Faisal sitting next to each other. We saw the Syrians and we saw the Iranians, all of them coming. These problems were there then, and these problems are there today. You're absolutely right. I think the very fact that they have gathered under the same roof is a remarkable achievement. What's important is that countries like Pakistan and others, they should take this further and try that the so-called differences within the Muslim world, are somehow solved. I think it will be a great achievement, on the part of this committee and on the part of the entire Muslim committee. They should forfeit their differences, which are minor basically, I think, and they should collectively move forward. I think we are more than 1 billion people in the world. We are not a small, I think we're more than 1.5 billion people in the world. We are the second largest community in the world. And I think, and we have ample resources, we are not a poor bloc. We're considerably endowed with natural resources and all that. And Afghanistan is a hugely rich country, Look at the untapped resources, which still lie hidden there. I mean, if there is peace in Afghanistan, and this is, by the way, the other thing, which I didn't bring up, the Americans, they always seek wealth, wherever they go. I mean, they attacked Iraq because they were out after their oil wells. Similarly, Syria, they wanted their oil wells. Libya, they wanted their oil wells. Halliburton, who has not heard of them, basically, they get these contracts and all that. So technically, their war machine is always operative. And unfortunately, in the past many decades, this war machine has operated at the cost of the Muslim world. I think it's time for them to understand it, and it's time for them to sort of take remedial measures and move forward as a unified force. Very important. And I hope this leads to that.
But Joseph, this is not, as you very rightly pointed out, many Muslim countries have taken the brunt of American foreign policy that has increasingly become more difficult towards the Islamic countries. And a recent example is Turkey. Turkey's currency is under immense stress. And Turkey is recently being put on FATF's grey list. Something that cannot be justified right away. By the way, Pakistan's rate of non-compliance in FATF is equivalent to United States of America. That is asking Pakistan to do more, but let's not talk about it. Tell me, how do you see Turkey? Because Turkey also wanted to take a lead role in security of Kabul airport. Turkey is also trying to seek some attention from other countries and trying to do things that may basically change the outlook of its foreign policy. How do you see the role of Turkey when it comes to Afghanistan, and what do you believe Turkey would try to take out of the current situation?
You're tempting me to get into something which is very close to my heart, and that is the division within the world, Muslim world, not just the world, but the Muslim world. Unfortunately, that division is between a progressive approach and a not so progressive approach, which I also at times refer to as an obscurantist approach. Turkey today more or less represents a progressive approach to moving forward, basically, coming to terms, with the traditional blocks in the Muslim world, and sort of moving on because we need to move on. We can't remain stuck in cave days, etc., etc. And this is what we keep telling the Taliban also, that they have to remodel themselves, to become to fit into the modern world and the demands of the modern world. Turkey is going through a difficult time. Turkey's lira is under enormous pressure, but Turkey has come out of it in the past. Turkey will come out of this in the future also. I think it is also for countries like Pakistan. I think they have given immense support to Pakistan. One of the 3 or 4 countries in the world, which specifically talks about the rights of the Kashmiri people, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, and of course China. These are the countries basically we only talk about. The others do talk about it, but in a very
diplomatic
manner, right? So I think we are greatly obliged to these countries, so I think in a situation like this, when Turkey is under pressure, we should do as much as we possibly can. And Turkey will definitely. It's a very vibrant country. It's a very vibrant bunch of people there. I'm sure you must have gone there. I've gone there. Very, very vibrant bunch of people. They will come out of it. They will definitely come out of it.
Turkey is under economic crisis at the moment. They haven't come out of it as yet. Iran is another country that is in the immediate neighborhood under the worst type of sanctions that humankind has known.
Under sanctions for more than 40 years.
Their currency, their central bank, a part of their military is also under sanctions.
Under sanctions.
And they are in the immediate neighborhood of Afghanistan, seeing all of this is happening there. How do you see Iran looking towards the situation? What do you think Iran would be expecting?
Iran wants peace in this part of the world. Iran definitely, its future is linked with peace, and it is not like back in the 90s, when the Iranians were supporting the so-called former Northern Alliance, which was again put together by Ahmad Shah Massoud and Amrullah Soleh, etc., etc. Now there is no support for that kind of rebellion coming up and that kind of resistance coming up. So technically speaking, as I said earlier, the entire regional country, all the regional countries, are together on this one platform, which is to bring peace to Afghanistan. Even Iran is there. Iran may have its slight differences and all that, but by and large, we are all together on this platform. So there is no divergence between Iran and Pakistan and other countries.
But there are many in international media who say Iran would always play on the ethnic lines. How do you comment on that?
I wish no country would play on the ethnic lines. During the times of Prophet, there was no division in Islam. There was only one Islam. There was no Sunni. There was no Shia. There was no Deobandi.
But sir,
these are the later day creations, and I think we should shun those creations. Basically, let's get back to the basics, which is Islam.
But what I'm trying to understand is that what is the kind of relationship with the state of Iran and the leadership of Taliban?
Well, at this moment in time, I think it's moving in the right direction. I can say that. And I think, in case it continues moving like this, I think over a period of time they shall have enough mutual trust and confidence developed that they will be able to work together. They are interacting with each other. Iranians have not closed down their embassy there. It's still working. So I don't see any reason why there would be a derailment of relations between the Iranians and Taliban. That is what Pakistan is working on. Pakistan is interacting very closely with Iran and urging them on, that look, we need to speak with one voice when it comes to peace in Afghanistan. And I think we are doing it. The statement today by the Iranians, very positive. And there was a call on the Prime Minister by the Iranian Foreign Minister. He was there and he brought a special message from the Iranian President. So because of the special efforts that the Prime Minister has made with regard to forging closer relations with Iran, I think we have succeeded to a great extent. So I think these are all positives. But the important thing is what we have lacked in Pakistan, and this is something which is outside the ambit of what we're discussing here. There has been lack of continuity of policies in Pakistan. From one government to the other, basically we go diametrically in the opposite direction. I think there should be continuity of policies if these are good policies that we have pursued in the last 3¼ years. So that in the future, whichever government is there, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be there. But even if theoretically speaking, hypothetically, we're not there, the other governments must be a continuity of policy. It's very important, very important.
Thank you very much, Rauf Hasan Saab, SAPM on Information and Broadcasting, for being my guest in today's program.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rauf Hasan Saab very wisely pointed out all the events that are happening around Afghanistan. He also helped us to understand Afghanistan's point of view when it comes to these sanctions. These are a tough time for Afghani people, the people of Afghanistan. Pakistan is doing whatever Pakistan can do, and it is now up to the member countries of OIC, how do they play their role. In the end, I will only say that hunger is not an issue of charity. Hunger is an issue of justice, and the people of Afghanistan are looking toward us for the justice. The transmission will continue, but we'll take a break here. Be with us.